you put yourself in a place of weakness when you say, I don't know, maybe it's just me, I think that maybe, but what if, but instead you just say, hey, from my perspective, this feels like this, or this conveys that. Welcome to another episode of Create or Die. This is your host, your boy, Ike Allred, coming at you with another fresh, tasty episode. Now, this episode is going to be a little different, and I highly recommend you check it out on YouTube or some type of visual version of the podcast. As much as I'm sure you love listening to my sultry, scratchy voice or whatever, I'm telling you, this is one where you're going to get your money's worth if you're looking at what we're doing, okay? Because we're going to do something a little different. In talking to a friend of mine and longtime supporter of the pod, he gave me some ideas about maybe some things that he thinks would be of value. And maybe you're a like-minded individual. So if that's the case, and you want to learn a thing or two, if you will, about my thoughts around design, illustration, then this is going to be the episode for you. And I got thinking, I could put together some type of presentation or, break things out in steps and get all formal with it. But no, we're going to fly by the seat of our pants. We're going to jump in and out of different examples, and hopefully you'll learn a little bit more about my perspective. Maybe you'll learn something that'll help you. Now, design, illustration, art, creativity in general is subjective, and like what I have written on the wall behind me, doubt and art, they go hand in hand. If you don't doubt what you're doing is good, or if there isn't some type of doubt associated with it, then I would argue that it's not art. You're not pushing it far enough. Now, sometimes that's the brief. That's what is needed for the commercial art piece that you're creating. I think it's always a good idea to speak your mind, share your perspective as an experienced creative, but in the end, it's up to the client as to whether or not that's what they want. And in the end, they're paying the bills. But I think we got to do our due diligence and say, hey, this is what I recommend. This is why. A lot of clients are going to have the tendency to want to cram everything into that tight spot or that limited real estate that they have for their website or their brochure or business card or whatever. And it's our job as a designer to talk about why that might not be a good idea. Why, if you are making it too busy, it doesn't complement the brand correctly, as an example. So I'm here. I'm on my Pinterest account, Create or Die. Check it out. Follow me there if you like. I have several boards. I've been on Pinterest since the beginning, even back before it was cool to be a designer on here. Back when people thought it was just for scrapbooking, knitting, and home decor ideas. So I'm a little bit of a pioneer, if you will. But anyways, I digress. So let's just jump into one of these boards, and I'll talk about why I chose some of these pins, why they belong on the Inspiring Graphic Design board, for example. So here we are. Now I've got a separate folder or a board within a board all about custom packaging. We may dive into that or we may not. I don't know. But let's just pick one of these at random and decide, like dissect it. Why is it good design? Why does it work for the brand or the vehicle that it's being put upon or whatever? There's lots of different stuff here, and it's amazing. It's like you'll have a creative brief, a certain project that you need to work on, and before you get started, it's a good idea to just kind of cruise through something like this for some inspiration. And sometimes for a specific client, one thing will pop out. For another client, another thing will pop out. And so it's good to kind of expand your horizons, because it's easy to fall into these design clicks, if you will, where, hey, I'm a minimalist and that's all I do, 1-2 colors, ton of white space. So let's look at this one, for example, from Rotesma. I don't know if that's a real brand or not, but super clean, minimal. You can see on the back of this letterhead, it's just solid color with simple mark in the middle, super strong. This brand, it looks like they're using imagery of a rhinoceros. So they're trying to convey strength. It's a big, bold color, kind of a reddish orange. And the photography is black and white, which again helps that solid, flat color really stand off. Looks like from looking at the photography here that it's construction related. So that makes sense that you would want to convey strength and toughness. So this was a good choice, I think, to base it around a rhinoceros, thick skin, strong animal, and use bold colors. So those are some of the things that work here. I like that they're obviously using custom photography here, and while up above on the website it's all grayscale, they show some kind of muted, desaturated images that might work as well in different scenarios. So there you go. Let's hop on out of this and talk about another one. And then right next to it, there's something that is definitely not minimalist. It's almost brutalist, where they're kind of breaking some rules here. They're using weird overlays of photography. They've separated the colors out, and we've got kind of this RGB or CMYK thing going on. It kind of creates some chaos in the imagery. You've got text overlapping the white areas where it's nice and readable, and then it gets a little harder to read as it overlaps some of this other imagery. And then we see, as we go into the magazine here, like a big colored circle that overlays the monochromatic orange image and the text below, and they repeat that, so now it's intentional on the next spread here. They've done a great job with their typography as far as creating good hierarchy. You've got Your title is big and bold, and I don't know what you want to call that, but the initial block of copy is really big and bold and spreads the entire page, whereas when you get into the meat of the copy, they go into this 4-column grid where things are much smaller, and it just kind of works. What does this convey? It doesn't convey order and clarity and strength. Instead, it's celebrating, I think, the randomness, the chaos that is our modern world. And it does it in a bold way. While these people, some of them look like they could be a model, most of them are real people, raw headshots, candid shots that make you feel like, hey, this is real life, this is hard hitting, this is not a rosy picture of the world. No, this is in a different language, Russian or something, so I can't read it. I don't know what it's saying, but visually that's what it's conveying to me, and I imagine it's some kind of editorial piece. So I celebrate it and like it, and it's good design, even though it's totally different from that last example of a lot of white space, minimalist. It's still intentional, and they repeat their kind of design language again and again. They have this cover page or initial title page of the article that has kind of a collage of images. We've got a few examples of those, and then when you get into the article itself, like I talked about, the typography, and then these kind of secondary images with some copy that definitely is intentional, the way they overlaid that circle of color. So I don't know if that helps, if that makes sense as to why this works for this use case or whatever. This is an editorial piece, and they're trying to convey in the design kind of the messy reality of the world while still making it beautiful in its own way. Okay, so it's good to learn how to appreciate things that aren't necessarily your wheelhouse or what you go to all the time. So, okay, there's a couple of print heavy pieces, and that's what you're going to find in the graphic design stuff. Let's find something else that's different, pops out at us here. Just scrolling through some stuff, looking for something that speak to me. Well, there's just so much. I don't even know where to begin. Okay, here we go. Something a little different. So this looks like it could be an HTML email that would be pretty heavily image heavy design, but it could also be a web page. Again, this is in a different language, and it feels feminine and young and hip, and they've taken these, I don't know if it's a 45-degree angle, and incorporated it throughout the entire page. Now, this would be a nightmare to build in code, but it really stands out and is beautiful in its own way. It sets things apart. You've got some great custom photography, which is always a winner. You've got some sans serif fonts here on this hero image, and I don't know that something like this is even possible in just HTML. This would have to be an image, the way that it's kind of cutting out of this yellow section and poking into the color where it inverts. But look at the color palette. I mean, it's kind of pastel. It complements the colors of the dresses and different feminine clothing. And you can tell I'm a little less comfortable with this one and describing it, because it is out of my comfort zone, and it's important as a designer to understand your audience, and you're not always going to be able to relate to them really well. You know, as a male designer who doesn't shop for female clothing and doesn't necessarily, you know, understand why, you know, one article of clothing would be better than another, or how you would really pair those together per se. You need to do your research. It's just like you can't write about something until you know that subject, right? And there are things that you just intuitively know because it's something you're passionate about, but there are other things that you can do research on. So this is an example of that. All right, so that's a little bit about some graphic design. Let's jump back out of this board and into another one here. It's the best way if I Pinterest is kind of funny. Sometimes the back button on your browser takes you to places that you weren't expecting. Okay, so that was a little bit about my thoughts on some just kind of graphic design heavy stuff. Let's look at something else. What shall we do? Okay. Illustration, yeah, that's always a favorite. So this is my sweet 2D illustration board. 2D, not 3D, right? So you can see got a lot of flat, bold, really graphical examples in here more recently, because, you know, project that I worked on for Adobe called for that kind of imagery, and that's not something that I'm usually living in. You know, it's not my go-to illustration style. So again, I had to look at what other people have done and decide for myself, like, why does this look good and why does it work? Okay, so here we are. I pulled up this cooking graphic. It's really graphical. Some of the items, it's kind of hard to tell what they are. Feels mid-century modern, kind of a nod to the 50s, early 60s design style, but with a modern, clean, super hard-edged vector twist to it. And it just feels fun and playful. It's, you know, I think mostly appeal to the feminine audience, but I think because it's strong and playful, it can appeal to everyone at some level. But let's just look at this. We've got kind of a sausage in the upper left. There's some grapes in this really tight grid of circles. You've got what I think is a wedge of cheese. It's probably an egg. You know, I could name everything this thing. It looks like a carrot, some bacon, all these different elements. Could that blue thing be a potato? You know, T-bone steak. You got a banana. popsicle, broccoli, or cauliflower, bowls within bowls. So you get an idea, even though it's a very graphical representation of what these things really are. Once you are in this world, you can accept that this is a T-bone steak, or this is a pea pod, where if those things were just by themselves, you may not see that, but because of what's around it, you're able to kind of use your deductive reasoning and decide, like, okay, we're looking at food related items here, and it's super powerful. From a distance, it's just a nice balance of colors, and up close, you can see kind of the interest that goes into it and the different techniques, and it's actually extremely hard to create stuff like this. And then look at how the white space in between each element is pretty even, and nicely balanced. I mean, there's definitely some areas that are thicker than others, but generally speaking, it all fits nicely together in a grid. And that ain't easy, friends. You think, oh, these are just some basic shapes, I can knock that out real quick. Well, yeah, if you're copying this, but if you're trying to produce something unique and new, yeah, it's a whole different story. So what would I do? What did I do in this example I'm trying to, describe without getting too detailed about the work I did? You can't just take this and say, okay, I'll change up the colors and, do my own food items maybe. I mean, you could, but that's, bordering on the plagiarism realm. So you might take that one, you might take this one with dogs and cats and instruments, and you can see this one does not have kind of consistent white space between everything. It intentionally creates some tangents in the imagery and overlaps other images. We've got a simple color palette. It's really graphical. Again, they've not everything is a noun, a person, place, or thing. Some elements are just graphical elements in the background, like these kind of Purina checkered pattern and these random circles in a black rectangle. So how would you marry those two together? It's an interesting exercise. So that's one way I'll use reference, or and a lot of times it's good if you're working with the client, if you can say, hey, go find me some stuff that you like. You're looking for a certain illustration style. I can suggest a handful, and maybe, by happenstance, we'll just land on something that you're happy with, which does and can happen. But it's the potential for success is a lot higher if your client says, hey, here's some inspiration. This is kind of what I like. I like this really graphical, organic grid technique. Can we do something like that? Or, let's go into another board of graphical stuff. So this is, almost Beavis and Butthead, weird kind of over the top characters, with some fun hand-drawn typographical elements. I think these are potential stickers that you would use in texting. or they could just be used as icons in general. But again, it takes, some imagination, excuse me, to understand what in the hell is going on here with some of these. But because they're all coming from the same well, the same design style, the same visual form language, then it works, and you start to appreciate, even though this may not be your style, this may not be how you draw or the types of illustrations you would normally gravitate to, you can learn to appreciate it and see what are some things, some patterns that I can identify here that make these characters feel like they're part of the same world, because in some ways they're all over the place. They have very different looking noses, but then and some of these don't even have noses from farther away. We've got real straight on, as well as a harsh kind of profile view of some of these images, but then there are these simple kind of 3/4 views of the characters, and they all still work. I think it's the bold color palette, of course. The heads on all these characters are really large. The arms, in most cases, are really big, and the legs and feet are really small. So those are just some things you might identify. Also, lots of texture, in the arms to represent hair, to represent water drops. So some different things that you might look at. And again, this isn't my go-to style, but let's say someone gave this to me as their inspiration. I've got to wrap my head around, like, how can I create unique things? Like, I work in the banking industry, fintech world as, a creative. And so these icons, the way they are, I really can't see how I could use them. But if I were to create financial looking illustrations based on this style, you could do, money, coins, dollar bills, a piggy bank kind of in this style, someone holding an iPhone like they're using an app, or sending money from one user to another, and then instead of this color palette, I could find one that's slightly different, but still really complementary. Like, you've got kind of this orange and blue, which are complements of each other, and then yellow and purple, which there's very little purple, but this bold kind of navy blue black color almost acts as a purple. So anyways, that's a little deep dive into that style of illustration, and it may not be your bag. Lots of different styles here, and I love to just collect them all and appreciate how one might complement one industry or brand, and another style might complement another, right? Let's see, lots of good stuff we could talk about here. You're probably screaming at the screen right now, like, just pick something, or pick that one, or this one. And how would you go about creating something like that? Some of these things don't really belong in here. I don't know how they got in here. Should have been more infographic, but you never know. I'm all over the place sometimes when I'm saving these little gems. It's fun to see process stuff like this. Like, you can see that to create this beautiful kind of landscape of exaggerated Teton Mountains or something. They're just, they just threw down these solid colors, thinking about, they wanted their midground to be bright and the focus, and so they gave that a brighter color, and then the foreground mountains here, they almost took that same color but really ramped it up, added some black and reds to it to create this rich kind of burnt umber brown. And then in the background you've got a little mountain peak popping up that is not necessarily lighter in value than this midground stuff, but it's definitely desaturated, which could come from the atmosphere or whatever. So, and then they lock those down. Those each of those elements, the background, midground, and foreground, could be on separate layers. And then using like an airbrush, you can just paint on that layer and have it locked to pixels so it won't paint outside of it. Blend that together, add a little details, throw in some shadows, and draw an owl, right? There's that joke about how to draw an owl. Anyways, you would have had to been there. But some good, fascinating stuff, and it's fun to see process stuff like that. But let's talk about another illustration here and see why it might work. So many good stuff. So many different styles. Alright, let's talk about this one. So, for those of you not watching and just using your mind's eye to imagine what it is I'm talking about, we've got several people, most of them are walking, and they're of all different shapes and sizes, ages, weights, heights. I don't know if there's much diversity in race, but yeah. Anyways, you can see what are some similarities here? What makes all of these feel like they're part of the same or they all have similar design language. Okay, so let's point out a few things. Well, the general movement of most of these characters is kind of an S-curve movement. If we look at this guy here in the middle with the hoodie on, his head is forward, you follow it down his back, his knees come forward, and then his back leg is back. So it's kind of a subtle S-curve. You can find those in all of them, even this woman that's standing up straight with her arms closed, folded. If you were to follow her hair and around her arm, and that shoots you to the outside hip here and back in. So you just find S-curves. So that's one thing. You can also see that in most of these, the general rule is they go from small, pointy top of the head to more going on in the middle, and then taper down to these really tiny feet. So none of them have cankles, if you will. They all come down to real thin ankles, and the legs, the arms have some real contrast in thins and thicks. So that's another thing. Okay, what else can we? Most of the heads, if not all of them, are kind of more elongated, which helps with that pointy top and then elongated head, pulled seamlessly right into the neck and down into the body. And there's just enough detail in these to where you get an idea of their expression. You can see the way that they're walking. Are they young and energetic? Are they overweight and out of shape? Are they in love? Whatever, there's lots that you can pull from there. And then, just again, you could use that same kind of flat colors technique we saw in the mountain range moments ago and apply that to the shading and highlights in the clothing and the bodies of these characters. So really nice, and I like them because they're not just the standard kind of happy line, mono width line drawings that you see a lot today. I tried not to create anything that just felt too, or not create, but save, pin anything that felt like too overdone, but some of these are getting close to that. So like if we click on this, you can see, clean vector lines with a mono weight to them, meaning there's not thicks and thins in the strokes. It's all the same thickness. And then it's almost like a multi-color print process where the blue's printed and then the gray and the black over that or whatever, which gives it kind of a retro vibe. And then they're real kind of intentional about where they use outlines as opposed to just solid colors. And that's something that, if you were trying to use this as inspiration, it would take some choices, like why is this girl with blue hair, her face is outlined with black in the front of her blue hair, but then the back side is not outlined at all. But then we scroll down here to this girl with basically white hair. All she has is blue mono width lines to communicate what her hairstyle is. Even this guy, this doctor looking guy looking at a menu or his patient's records or whatever, he's got a light gray hair and it's almost a little hard to see, but it's still enough to frame the face, and they're just trying to communicate like what's the minimal amount of lines and detail in each of these shapes that I need to communicate. And this bottom illustration is my least favorite of the batch of 5. Excuse me with all the yawning, but anyways, it's a little bit about that. Should we move on? Or do you want more illustration? That is a question, right? Alright, let's just look at this one real quick, shall we? So, here's something for Formula One Virgin. You can see the logo in there. Formula One. It's got a heroic feel to it. We've got speed lines. It's kind of a dry brush, still kind of a minimal color palette. It's a primary color palette, even red, yellow, and blue, black and white. So it just feels American, simple. Well, I can't say just American. It's British too, right? Just elementary and approachable, and a lot of energy in those colors, right? Again, we have the dry brush speed lines to show that things are moving fast. The really staged shots here, kind of heroic presence of someone in the foreground, midground, and background, balanced really well. All things that almost feels retro, like propaganda. Like this almost reminds me of same painterly kind of acrylic style as the old Uncle Sam posters from, I believe it was World War II. We want you to serve, or I want you, or whatever it said. So because of the decision to use this style, this painterly style, it feels like there's some history to it, which, let's assume Virgin was, just starting in the Formula One world. They want to make it feel like they belong there forever. There's a history there, even if they're brand new. It conveys that, and it kind of tells a cool story, heroic story. Whereas if this were just clean vectors execution, like some of the illustrations we just looked at, you'd lose some of that. It would feel modern and clean, but may be completely devoid of history. So some thoughts on that one. Let me know, is this podcast worthy? Are you agreeing? I hope not. I hope you're not agreeing with everything. You may think, no, this image speaks this to me, and that's okay. And that's something that took me a long time to learn. When I was defending my artwork or designs, or critiquing others, you put yourself in a place of weakness when you say, I don't know, maybe it's just me, I think that maybe, but what if, but instead you just say, hey, from my perspective, this feels like this, or this conveys that. And you may have others agree with you, but you may not. And that's okay. That's the hard and the easy part about design, creativity, and illustration, is the fact that it is subjective. And there's no wrong answer, because we all come from different backgrounds, and so one thing may say something different to me than it'll say to you. Like an example I would use is, and I might get political, or may be towing on the lines of things that may be inappropriate to be said, but I don't care, okay? Because you're my people, and we're just gonna say it, and you're gonna know that it's meant in the best way possible, right? So, for example, let's think of an old 50s Doris Day movie, or John Wayne movie, or James Stewart, where there were no swear words. They taught you in a lot of cases, like, that there's good and evil, that there's right and wrong. And this is the product of the greatest generation, right? The post World War II generation. And growing up, for most of my life, I've kind of looked back kind of longingly, like, why can't our world be like that today? And this is my perspective as a, white man in his 40s. Okay. And so that's initially what I see when I see those movies or think about those times, like, oh, things must have been so perfect. But from the perspective of others, let's say an African American person, the 50s, 60s were a dark time in this country for people of color, like, segregation and, just horrible, rampant racism, and people that profess to be good, honest people would the next moment be treating, these people of color horribly. And so when they see, an image of Doris Day or John Wayne, or they sit down and watch 2 minutes of one of those movies and they don't see anyone that they identify with, it doesn't give them the same warm and fuzzies that it might have initially given me. Now, I've, come to accept that, every time in human history has its underbelly and ugly side. And so I no longer look fondly at those things, but instead try to think about, what are the beautiful things about today, and celebrate those instead. Another thing with those time periods were, the mistreatment of women, the lack of opportunities they had, the fact that, they were expected to be at home, or even if you're Doris Day, a working woman, you had to be, portrayed in these movies. You had to be attractive, and it was all about meeting Mr. Wonderful and then settling down and having a baby. Those were how those movies ended. Like, okay, she's finally, So anyways, apologize if you weren't expecting a heavy kind of look at the dynamics of the world. And I don't even know what I'm talking about. So, does that make sense? Or is that something that resonates with you? Do you completely disagree? That's okay. I'm just saying that each of us, because of our background, different design elements, different illustration styles, are gonna, say something, communicate something different. Yeah, some good stuff here. Okay, well, let's hop out of here and we'll jump into one more area and kind of talk about, what this says to me, why it's good design or not. And, I'm just one dude. You let me know in the comments what I got wrong, in your opinion, right? Okay, infographics. As a working designer in the fintech world, this is something that is a big part of what I've traditionally worked on at MX, for example, because there's kind of some complex things that you're trying to communicate, and there aren't a lot of off-the-shelf illustrations or icons or stock photography or whatever that can communicate kind of these difficult concepts. So, speaking of fintech, let's pull this up. So this illustration, is talking about secured APIs. and you can see it looks like a mobile banking app, because you can read the words balance on there, and you can see a figure connected to some kind of crazy secured machine with what's the term? Whatever, fingerprint tracking. Excuse me, I'm just like slowed down to a real slow, disturbing pace in I think I've lulled myself asleep. Now, earlier on in this podcast series, this season 1 of Create or Die, we talked about how a lot of people would just tune in to fall asleep to my voice. And that's okay. But I apologize when I get into that in a monotone, tired, hypnotic place. But so this is obviously, this illustration of this secured API is not really how it works. You don't hook your phone up to some antiquated counting machine, but in a fun way, and because of the strong graphic color palette, it communicates like, well, I think, like, hey, this is a hip, contemporary fintech that is coming up with a fun way to describe what their API does, or what an API is. That same artist done some other things, so let's click on a different illustration here. So again, we've got this 10-key calculator thing plugged into what looks like an iPad, and then we've got like a Rolodex of something like CDs and some cool knobs, executive toy over here in the top right, and we see the word investing, and so maybe this Rolodex is representative of a portfolio of all of the different stocks that this person invests in, and this calculator is a rolling tally of their total portfolio. But that's fun. They've taken what's something that's hard to communicate, and they've communicated in a way that's obviously not realistic in how it actually works, but it communicates what's going on in a fun way. So this is a collection, a FinTech illustration collection that these all come from, and they provide you with different color palettes. This feels like the illustrations you see in Robinhood's apps and others. So that's one example of some infographics just trying to communicate some complex concepts and how it works. And then we can get to things that are more abstract here, but still can communicate. Let's see if I actually have a good example of that. This takes me back. Lots of good stuff over the years that we've collected, and it's interesting to see how styles have changed. But they come back around again, something that feels a little dated today, and 3 years from now might feel like a cool throwback, right? Well, here's an example of something that's more abstract, and it's all over the place. You've got these kind of highways of data. You got these little bits of data flying around you got this, silo or column in the middle. And so just tells me, and again, this is in a different language, so I don't know what it's saying exactly, but it feels like a throwback to mid-century Jetson kind of futuristic stuff, but done in a contemporary way, super graphical. This could totally work on, a big title of Big Data, or what can data do for you, right? Because sometimes we try too hard with our diagrams or our illustrations, and we want to make sure it communicates everything super clearly, but then it's not art, it's like clumsy. It's just clumsy, that's all. Not enough. Seriously. Or look at this. This is something about Swedish immigrants, and it's too small for me to read what's really going on, but it's some type of line graph over a period of time, and whether this is intentional or not, you can almost see a profile of someone's face on either side of this graph. And I assume where the graph is bigger, wider, that's where more of this immigrating was happening. And the red looks like it may have something to do with deaths, and that was more concentrated in these early years. So you may not know exactly what this is communicating, but it just gives this kind of ghostly, cool vibe. This is kind of synonymous with some of what you see inside of Iron Man's helmet, right? You're getting his perspective. It's like, at a glance, you can get a feel for if things are good or bad, or even though you don't know exactly what those graphs are representing. So anyways, let me know if this is something that was helpful. If you want me to dive into other areas, if a podcast like this where I'm just sharing my opinions about design or illustration or creativity in general, if that's something that's helpful. It's just, once again, one dude's opinion. So if you enjoy what it is I'm putting down, if these knowledge nugs are resonating with you and you're starting to pick them up and collect them and seeing value, well, consider giving us a follow, on Spotify or YouTube or Apple Podcasts, or however you consume this little show. It'd be much appreciated. And I'm gonna ask you to do one more free thing, and that is you tell your friends and your family that you're finding value in this here podcast and that they need to tune in. And if we can do that, then this thing's going to continue to grow. We're knocking on the door of episode 52, which will be the final episode of season 1. 1 year of weekly episodes. I cannot believe that we're getting there. Yeah, this is episode 46 or 47, so blows my mind. Anyways, till next time, my friends, just keep on creating. Create or die.